of 3 trees. In fact, the trees I'm talking about, only 2 of them, as I'll explain, are trees, and one is something else. But I've increasingly realized the importance and interest of trees, that they can talk to each other, that they help each other, that they're extraordinary. But 3 of them that have particularly interested me, and I've begun to appreciate their value and what they've done for human beings, are oak trees. I have some oak trees in my garden, and the oak is the national symbol of Britain. Hearts of oak are our ships, hearts of oak are our men, and so on. And that indeed is one of the wonderful things about oaks, that you can argue that we wouldn't be here in a free nation without the oak tree, because out of oak trees were made the great ships that guarded England against invaders until a couple of 100 years ago. The Armada, Spanish Armada, for example, which was defeated by oak ships. And so the success of the British in their empire and in their guarding of their liberties and their land was very largely dependent on this amazingly strong wood from oak trees. Another kind of use of wood, which I hadn't realized until I looked into it, was our cathedrals and great churches. Among the greatest buildings in the world are the cathedrals of England, Canterbury, Ely, Lincoln, Winchester, and even my own King's College Chapel. And in each of these cases, they couldn't have been built, in most cases, without oak. The oak is concealed. It's up right at the top, holding the building together, in the case of King's College Chapel, or in other uses to supplement stone, because again, it is such a wonderfully strong wood that you can use it to make a building last for centuries and centuries against all the things that eat wood and so on. So that's a second use. A third is whiskey. Whiskey is preserved in oak, and it's given its distinctive flavour from being put into oak casks. So, being 5/8 a Scotsman and proud of my national drink, without oak, much of the success and flavour of the great malt whiskies of my native country would never have been present. And so when you walk through an oak forest, as I do quite often, and you look at the little oaks growing and growing, very slow, centuries and centuries, realize a little bit about how they have shaped a nation. We are a nation of oaks. A second form of tree that I've appreciated more and more is the willow. Willow bends, it's very beautiful. I live in the Fenland, and along the banks of the Cam and the Ouse and the other rivers, you see these wonderful willow trees, different kinds of willows, some of them the Chinese willow, some of them native willows, and many of them half fallen over, and they are filled with birds and so on. But I hadn't realized the value of willows, and I'm sure I've only can mention 1 or 2, and there must be many more. One of them, of course, is for our national sport, cricket. Willow used in cricket bats, and no doubt you could have used another wood, but it wouldn't have been presumably as effective as willow. The other is an example of how most plants, most trees, once you begin to study them, have extraordinary medical benefits. And this has always interested me. If you look at the herbals, as they were called in the 17th century, they're filled with plants, English plants, and you'd find the same thing in China, of course, where they've discovered by accident someone's eaten or rubbed on this particular plant, and they've discovered that it prevents malaria, or it prevents stomach aches, or it makes you less depressed. And I don't know how or when it was discovered that willow, if you prepared it in a certain way, would be one of the wonder drugs. It's perhaps one of the 2 or 3 or 4 most important medicines in the world, because it's the basis of aspirin. And aspirin as a painkiller is, of course, all of us have eaten or used, or most of us, aspirin or Disprin. And without willows, those wonderful drugs would not have been possible. So long live the willow, and it's particularly, I'm fond of it because there's a willow tree, or there was in my college, in King's College, Cambridge, which is featured in a poem by the Chinese poet Zhu Mao on saying goodbye to Cambridge. And every Chinese learns this poem. And so this willow tree, of which I have bits in my garden, and a baby from that tree which was cut down recently, that is a famous, famous tree. So the willow tree is perhaps the most famous tree in the world. The last is not a tree at all, but I like to put it in here. It's a grass, and it's called bamboo. Now, bamboo you can see as a grass because it propagates sideways underneath the soil, and it doesn't drop seeds or whatever in the same way as other trees. But it is a miracle plant. Let's call it a plant, because if you look at its uses, if you had to call the English an oak civilization, then you would call the Chinese, and to a certain extent, a large extent, the Japanese, bamboo civilizations. Bamboos are used in almost every aspect of Chinese and Japanese life traditionally. Obviously for making houses, obviously for gardens, obviously for drinking vessels, and the list goes on and on. I have books on my shelves of bamboos and their uses, and I'm constantly astonished that from shoes, the geta, which you wore, up and down, through paper, through eating, you eat bamboo shoots. Bamboos are everywhere. They have this wonderful property of being extremely strong and yet flexible. You can make musical instruments of them, of course, and I saw this face to face when I worked in a Himalayan village. Huge storms would come down from the Annapurna Mountains, below which we were living, and the bamboos would look as if they would be torn up by their roots. But they just bent sideways, took the gale, and then, once it was over, righted themselves. So the kind of martial arts aspect of bamboos, that you absorb the energy and then you come back and you are not destroyed by force, is another wonderful feature. And they're also, of course, very beautiful. Bamboo grows, different kinds of bamboos, which one has in many gardens. So they are beautiful and extraordinarily useful, and an amazing old grass that has grown up into this multi type of plant, which I admire enormously, and maybe in an afterlife I wouldn't mind being a bamboo. Thanks.